Good morning, everyone. My name is Sun Ruibo. Today we are going to dive deep into the 1997 Asian financial crisis, or AFC. For a medical student, a financial crisis is much more than just numbers on a screen. It is a pathological study of a complex global system under extreme stress. In this presentation, we will analyze the pathogenesis of the 1997 crisis, its hidden linkage to the 2008 global financial crisis, and how we can identify the early warning signs of future economic collapses. Before the outbreak in 1997, Southeast Asia was the star patient of the global economy. Countries like Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia achieved what we call the Asian miracle through rapid export-led growth. However, beneath this prosperity lay significant vulnerabilities. To attract foreign capital, these nations adopted a fixed exchange rate system, pegging their currencies to the US dollar. Combined with premature financial liberalization, the region was like an organism with an underdeveloped immune system, suddenly exposed to the volatile currents of global capital. The pathogenesis of the AFC centered on structural mismatches. First, we saw a maturity mismatch, borrowing short-term funds to finance long-term illiquid projects like real estate. Second, there was a currency mismatch. Firms borrowed heavily in US dollars while earning in local currency. When you add excessive leverage to the mix, where corporate debt to equity ratios reached dangerous levels, the entire financial system was primed for what I called as systematic coagulopathy. The moment pressure was applied, capital circulation simply stopped. The breaking point came on July 2nd, 1997. Thailand, having exhausted its foreign reserves trying to defend the peg, was forced to let the butt float. As you can see in this chart, the exchange rate spiked instantly. Short sellers such as George Soros had successfully exploited the impossible trinity. This has triggered a violent contagion effect. Driven by herd instinct, psychological panic spread like a virus from Thailand to Indonesia, South Korea, and eventually Hong Kong. It was a classic case of a localized infection turning into a regional pandemic. Comparing 1997 to the 2008 global financial crisis reveals that while the epicenters differed, one in emerging markets, the other in developed ones, the root causes were strikingly similar. Both crises were fueled by massive asset bubbles and excessive leverage. In 2008, the subprime mortgage crisis in the US was essentially a more complex, securitized version of the same imbalances we saw in Asia a decade earlier. Both resulted in a catastrophic liquidity crunch that threatened the entire global financial architecture. Here is the core thesis. The 1997 crisis actually helped induce the 2008 crisis. After 1997, Asian nations learned a bitter lesson and developed a post-traumatic stress response. To ensure they would never again lack liquidity, they began hoarding massive US dollars reserves as self-insurance. This global saving glut flowed back into the US, purchasing treasuries and artificially suppressing US long-term interest rates. This cheap credit became the fuel for the US housing bubble. In medical terms, the overaccumulation of protective reserves in the East inadvertently fueled a tumor in the West. We can diagnose this impact using the ISLM model. When the crisis hit, plunging consumer confidence and a skyrocketing risk premium, a key concept from our lectures, shifted the IS curve violently to the left. As shown in the formula, y equals c of y minus t plus I of y, I plus premium plus g. Even if nominal interest rates fall, the output y collapses. This shift represents the severe recession and loss of economic vitality that follows a systemic financial shock. The treatment protocols differed significantly. In 1997, the IMF prescribed austerity measures, high interest rates, and fiscal cuts. This was a controversial bitter medicine that many may argue exacerbated the short-term pain. In contrast, during 2008, central banks acted as first responders with quantitative easing. They performed a massive blood transfusion by expanding their balance sheets to provide liquidity, effectively pushing the LM curve to the right to counteract the collapsing IS curve. How do we monitor for the next outbreak? We must look at the data. First, the debt to GDP ratio. According to Reinhardt and Rogoff, crossing the 90% threshold is the critical red line for growth. Second, watch for an inverted yield curve. As seen in this graph, when short-term rates exceed long-term ones, it is a reliable clinical predictor that the market expects a recession. Today, with global debt at record highs, the system remains in a state of chronic illnesses. In conclusion, the primary lesson is that liquidity is life. Financial institutions do not just die from a lack of profit, they die from a lack of cash. We have learned that regulation is often reactive, arriving only after the damage is done. Furthermore, we must be wary of moral hazard, where frequent bailouts encourage future risky behavior. History may not repeat itself exactly, but it certainly follows the same pathological patterns. That concludes my presentation. Thank you for your time and for joining me in this retrospective diagnosis of the global economy.